On today's Boomer Mill podcast, we are going to look at the evolution of careers in North America. Now, we've both had quite the journey in the workforce, from government jobs to nonprofit work to corporate life, small businesses, and even tech contract gigs. We have seen a lot, and today we'll be weaving our personal stories into the broader narrative and how work has changed over the decades.
And let's not forget, we'll also be discussing what the future holds, especially with China's rise as a superpower. So whether you're a boomer, Gen X, Millennial, or Gen Z, this episode is for you. I'm Jonathan, I'm a boomer.
And I'm Michelle, and I'm a millennial. And together, we're the Boomer Mill. Welcome back to the Boomer Mill podcast, where we bridge the generational gap one conversation at a time. Thank you all for listening, and if you'd like to see our faces, we are the Boomer Mill on both YouTube and Facebook. So I'm Michelle, your resident millennial, and I'm here with my co-host and partner in life, my husband.
That's me, the boomer in the mix. Today we're diving into a topic that affects all of us, no matter your age or background, your career. We're going to explore how work has evolved across generations, from the silent generation to Gen Z, and even take a look into what could be on the horizon for Gen Alpha. This episode is going to be packed with insight, some fun stats, and of course, our personal stories along the way.
So let's get into the silent generation and baby boomers. So let's start with the silent generation, born between 1928 and 1945. This generation is known for their hard work and their loyalty to their employers. They often stayed in their jobs for decades, working their way up the ladder.
That's right. My parents were part of this generation, and I remember them emphasizing the importance of stability and the company man mentality. The idea was to find a good job, stay there for 40 years, and then retire with a pension. The phrase was 40-40, which meant 40 hours a week for 40 years. It was a time when jobs were much more secure and the American dream was very much alive.
Interestingly, only 3% of this generation had a college degree, yet many were able to secure well-paying jobs, buy homes, and support their families. It was also a time when unions were strong and played a huge role in protecting workers' rights.
And then came the baby boomers. That's my generation. We were born between 1946 and 1964, and while we followed in the footsteps of the silent generation in terms of valuing stability, we also witnessed the beginning of significant changes.
Absolutely. Boomers saw the rise of the corporate world, but also the decline of the manufacturing sector. Many boomers pursued a higher education at a higher rate than their previous generation, and by 1980, 25% of boomers had a college degree. So this was the generation that saw the birth of the modern-day office worker.
I remember when I started working in the early 70s, there was still a very strong emphasis on staying with the company for the long haul. Later, I noticed a profound shift. People began to job hop more, especially in the tech boom that started in the late 80s and 90s. People could train on a new language or hardware platform and go to work for a new company in a matter of weeks. So few people were trained in the early tech that someone with a programming degree or even significant experience could get a job easily. I remember people changing jobs in weeks or a month or months because a recruiter offered them a bonus to move to work for another company that used that same software.
And as you millennials know, we have competition clauses that keep us from doing that. So that's how good the unions were then. So this might be a good time for you to share a story about your first jobs and how those experiences shaped your career path.
Yeah, I came into the workforce during a pretty ugly recession in the early 1970s, but I found a job in a hospital because of a special work program. That's a whole other Boomer Mill episode. Because of the work stresses in the hospital and the serious political upheaval that we know now as the Vietnam War, I became desperate to find psychological relief and ended up as a yoga teacher. That's the short version. Remember, in the 1970s, yoga was considered either weird or demonic. Yeah. I worked with that organization for about 10 years until it became somewhat chaotic, and I then trained as a carpenter. I have also worked as a computer programmer, a certified computer network systems operator, and for the past 15 years, I've been ranking businesses on the first page of Google. In contrast, my brother's experience was far more stable. He was a school teacher who trained for and taught both academic studies and musical instruction. He was a band teacher. And he held essentially the same job for his entire working career, which stretched about 40 years. He worked in different school districts, but that was more due to promotional opportunities that he had rather than economic conditions. He also worked during a period when unions were very strong and did a fair job of keeping teacher salaries in line with living costs.
So now let's talk about Generation X. And they were born between 1965 and 1980. And Gen Xers were often called the latchkey kids because they grew up at a time where both parents were likely to be found working. I'm kind of at the very end of the Gen Xers and the beginning of the Millennials, so I fell into this category. This generation is known for being independent, resourceful, and skeptical of institutions.
Gen Xers witnessed the decline of the traditional career path. The job for life mentality started to disappear with the rise of the digital age, and they were among the first to really experience technology in their careers and the workplace. The Millennials took the digital nomad career concept to the next level.
That's right, then came us, Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996. We entered the workforce during a time of significant economic change, right around the Great Recession. You guys were all there to feel that. So many of us were told at a very young age that a college degree was the ticket to a good job, but we quickly learned that that wasn't that simple. The 2008 recession severely impacted the millennial job market as many of us entered the workforce after this downturn. So there were really high unemployment rates, there was a scarcity of stable jobs, and it forced a lot of us to accept lower paying temp jobs and part-time positions, often unrelated to what we got our college degrees in. So this led to delayed career progression, financial instability, and a significant student loan crisis. So the economic challenges that we faced as millennials also shaped our attitudes about work, and it made us more cautious, more entrepreneurial, which I'm going to get into, and more focused on that work-life balance. So the long-term effects included a lower home ownership for us. There was a greater reliance on the gig economy because nothing was really stable for very long. And we're now coming into more patriarchal careers, in my opinion, and that's 100% based in abuse. And if you're not sure of what that looks like or if you fit into that model, how many of you have had an unqualified narcissistic employer who put all of their wants above your basic needs, like being able to pay your rent or your food or things like that? So we're going to go into how that's becoming more common later on in the conversation. And we're also the first generation to embrace remote work on a large scale, especially in tech. But let's not forget that we've also seen the rise of student debt and the challenges of homeownership. The average millennial carries 30 grand in student loans, which is a stark contrast compared to the other generations. Now, just to give you guys a little background, I did pay my debt. However, because I was dealing with not the best family. I went into that in the previous video. I was dealing with identity theft, and that included student loans that were taken out in my name. They also entered a bunch of life insurance policies that my husband and parents later tried to collect on, which I mentioned in the previous video. And they also stole my retail establishment, which was a little jewelry store, down to the studs. So I've had my family members actively working against me since birth. So that's a little bit different, but that's for another show. The reason we're bringing that up is because mass societal criminality and a lack of law enforcement, which we went into in our first podcast show, is the primary reason why Jonathan and I are both struggling. And that said, Jonathan, you started at a whole different timeline. You're a boomer. That's the previous century. So how did you get down here trogging away like us millennials?
I came from a well-to-do family that exploded, and I was lucky that my mother was brave enough and strong enough to fight back in the 1950s and end up with enough to move us to another community and start a new life and a career. It was chaotic, but that gave me the opportunity to learn how to surf chaos and find the wave of the new rather than get stuck on shore with the old. I'm also the first to admit that my job experience has not been anywhere near standard. I have been a paper boy, worked as a lab technician in a hospital, a yoga teacher, a carpenter, a production line worker, a computer programmer, a real estate broker, a website developer, a search engine optimization specialist, and now online media production, where we're both learning how to implement AI into all of those areas. The one characteristic that most of these jobs have is that they were very much in demand during a wave of change. For that to work, you have to keep your eyes open, research constantly, keep learning, and keep changing. Change is the greatest ally you will ever have in a tech career. I found that while it has been both rewarding and challenging, it is also stressful to always be on the bleeding edge of technology.
So let's get into my similar story of flexibility and freelance work, the challenges of job security, and how this reflects broader trends among millennials. Now to start, my parents are millionaires. They live in a mansion overlooking the water in a beautiful community, and they're upper middle class, and they're very well off. Okay. Despite that, from birth, I was put to work. Okay. I was a babysitter. I did lawn care. I did agricultural field work. I was a tutor at the local community college. I painted and repaired houses during the summers. I was an in-home nurse. I got my certification as a CNA at 15. I was a nanny, I was a house cleaner, and I was also an athlete. I was a marathon runner. I was also in cross-country track, and I coached those as well. So I prayed that one day my parents would love me and support me if I only worked hard enough. That's kind of how bad the home environment was. I was told that I needed to earn love and basic support. Now, later I learned the value of what a narcissistic contractual relationship looks like, and that it should not happen between a child and a parent. Thank you, therapy. But a healthy family is not predatory, and that was how I was raised. They literally just tried to kill and eat me for money. So that's kind of why my story might be a little bit different. I am curious to see how many others of you are dealing with this. I did manage to get a bunch of scholarships, academic scholarships, and go to college while I also worked full-time while going to class. And I did join a sorority. It was full of Catholic and Jewish girls. They were all high achievers like me, but they were completely supported, unlike me. And like, for instance, if there was a dance coming up, I had to take on a bunch of extra part-time jobs just to afford a dress. And I also could not go below a 3.75 GPA in order to keep my academic scholarships. And so not only was I working full-time, plus I was also having to keep that GPA up and do really well in my classes. So I did graduate with a master's degree in teaching, and I started work. But unfortunately, because I was conditioned by my parents to be a slave ever since I was little and be abused, my first major relationship and fiance, he beat me up and threw me out of the house. And so I didn't have a place to live, and I was living in my car for a while. And when I told my parents, I'm living out of my car and I don't know what to do, their reaction was to then take my car. So I didn't have a place to live, and I was on the street at that point, and they gave it to my sister saying that she needed it for school. Now, again, I was told I couldn't have my own bank account, I couldn't own my own car, I couldn't do any of these things even though I paid for them. So that's a different experience that I hope some of you guys had. But despite that, I went to the church that I had been attending. I told them what was going on, and I started living in people's basements, taking care of their children, and working as a substitute teacher in addition to nannying to earn my way out of poverty again. So that happened. I met what I thought was a nice guy at church. Turns out he was recruited by my father to continue the cycle of abuse and control. And when I got a full-time teaching job working for a school district, I never saw a single paycheck. Every single paycheck went directly to my husband and his family. And they got a ton of student loans, credit cards, and houses in my name without me knowing, because my now ex-husband worked in finance at the time. And so he was a professional thief and worked with my parents and his parents to steal my identity again. So I still didn't know quite what was going on. I got fired from my teaching job, well, I guess say laid off, along with a bunch of other teachers. And I was on unemployment and trying to find work. And while I was doing that, I was making a lot of jewelry because I was really good at it. And by the time my unemployment ran out, I went ahead and opened my own retail store, and it went smashingly well. That's how I met Jonathan. I mean, I could not keep things on the shelf. I was constantly making stuff, and the store became so successful. I'm talking just, when I started doing Pandora, we had a $16,000 day, you guys. I was doing really, really well in the store. So my parents and my ex-husband's reaction was to then loot the register regularly, and then they looted the entire store at one point, so I couldn't even sell stuff. So at that point, I'm homeless again, and I meet Jonathan because he was working with me at the time because he was helping me with my website. And I got a lot of tech certifications. I was also homeless during that time and relying on the YWCA for my legal support. And it took me about 5 years, but I had to get a new identity, and I finally started making money again to fully support myself, but that took a few years. Now, if you guys want to know like what my background looks like in more detail, there's a fabulous channel called Cults to Consciousness, and I'm going to go ahead and leave their link in the description. They're a great channel who go into controlling fundamentalist upbringings, which is what I had, and so I highly recommend you go and you check them out, and I'll include that link there. So let's get into Gen Z and the future of work. So Gen Z was born between 1997 and 2012, and this generation grew up with technology at their fingertips. They are the true digital natives, and that has had a huge impact on the way that they approach all kinds of work.
Yeah, Gen Z is entering the workforce with a whole new set of expectations. They value diversity, sustainability, mental health in the workplace. They're also more entrepreneurial, and many are looking to start their own business rather than just follow a traditional career path. I'm not claiming to own this particular focus, but it's very reminiscent of what I went through in my early work career, except maybe for the mental health focus. I was crazy to make some of the changes that I did.
And with the rise of remote work, Gen Z is more likely to work from anywhere in the world. But they're also facing a lot of significant challenges, like the high cost of living and the looming threat of climate change, which affects how they plan their careers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my millennial perspective on how Gen Zs are working. And I got this from a good friend of mine who works at Costco. And she said that many Gen Z workers are perceived to have a lack of that traditional work ethic that we all grew up with because of the digital age. And that emphasizes quick results and instant gratification. So additionally, we found that Gen Zs really prioritize that work-life balance, and that includes their mental health that Jonathan mentioned. So that's basically taking on meaningful work over long hours, and they often reject that hustle culture, which was valued by the previous generations. I found this a little shocking because if I'm not hustling, I don't have a place to live, I don't have food to eat. Even when I am hustling, I'm struggling, but again, I came from abuse. So that kind of made me a little worried to see that this generation is headed in an area where they feel a little disenfranchised. So what can we expect for Gen Alpha? We looked into that a little bit.
Yeah, looking ahead, we can expect more changes as Gen Alpha starts entering the workplace around 2030. Mm-hmm. This generation will likely be even more tech savvy, probably working in jobs that don't even exist yet. They're also loosening the laws around child labor as Gen Alpha children are reportedly working full-time jobs now, sometimes in dangerous conditions. Take a look.
2015, child labor violations have risen nearly 300%. And those are just the violations government investigators have managed to uncover and document. The Department of Labor says it's currently investigating over 600 cases of illegal child labor in America. Major American companies like General Mills, Walmart, and Ford have all been implicated. Why on earth is this happening? The answer is frighteningly simple: greed. Employers have been having difficulty finding the workers they need at the wages they're willing to pay, and rather than reduce their profits by paying adult workers more, employers are exploiting children. The sad fact.
So we were all told that child labor was going on globally, and now it's finally arrived at the United States again. So we cannot ignore the global landscape. China's rise as a superpower will undoubtedly influence the job market in North America, and it already is. We might see more competition for jobs, even from children, especially in tech and manufacturing, and possibly even shifts in global economic power. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a clip of what's going on in our area so you have a better idea of what we're referring to.
Under the Bush administration, the Obama administration, right, illegal immigrants who are not from Mexico were set free into the country. We came in and we said, it doesn't matter if you're from Mexico, Central America, Africa, Asia, you're going home. Now look at 2021, 2022, and 2023, what do you see? The massive delta between encounters, and those are border returns, they're not interior removals. That massive delta, where are all the people now in between the blue line and the yellow line? They are in your community. They are in your city. What does that mean? It means corporations are exploiting cheap foreign labor. It means city services are cash-strapped.
So that gap that both gentlemen were speaking of shows the corporate immigration or enslavement model that took place during COVID, and that happened in our area as well. So we looked at the U.S. Census specifically to our area, and we found that the employment of undocumented workers was really underreported, as it varies greatly depending on industry, company, and enforcement practices. And we don't have a lot of those here. So for accurate information, we went to our local government and labor statistics. And even though we found specific data, it was difficult to obtain the nature of it because it's undocumented work. That's how they're getting away with it. So that said, we found that 37% of workers in our area are undocumented, and they're not here legally, and they're here via corporate enslavement. So in addition to that, we go on walks. And whenever we find someone's wallet or a credit card or something, which is surprisingly common in this area, we run our employer background check to try to find the person and return the item to them. And we found that a lot of the people weren't even listed as citizens, and they were in fact here illegally. So we're thinking, how did they get bank accounts? How are they getting into housing and things like that? And so we're now also seeing in our neighborhood, and I'm curious to see if you guys are seeing this in yours, that they're scraping all of these like single family home neighborhoods, and they're putting up like these really, really quick 6 to 7 story like studio apartment buildings. And the best term that I can use to describe these is Soviet housing, because if you go to Eastern Europe, you see a lot of that. And they were sitting empty for a long time during COVID, and now they're being filled. And the people that are coming into them, they do not speak English, and they don't seem to have any connection to a job or career. So we found that really interesting since 2020 in our area. So we're basically dealing with a government that is allowing corporations to illegally hire immigrants and enslave them. And we looked a little more into this, and we actually asked around, and we found out that a lot of these people, the company that they work for, the corporation, they own their apartment, they have an apartment voucher, they own their car, that's how they get to and from work, or they have to use the bus system, so they own the bus pass, the employer does. They own all the insurance on these items, including health insurance, and they get a company-issued credit card to buy groceries and incidentals. So they own them. Full, lock, stock, and barrel. They own these people. And if you argue with your employer and you're not here legally, what position does that put you in? So we found that to be a little jarring when it came to our research. So let's take a moment to discuss what we think the future holds for careers in America, especially with the influence of global powers like China.
Well, the future of work is likely to follow the current trend, which is get up to speed fast, move fast, and never stop learning. Another significant change agent is going to be the impact that AI will have once it becomes simple and cheap for someone to generate virtually any type of content, visual, text, video, anything on any topic virtually free, practically instant, and absolutely no safeguards.
Yeah.
I'll admit it. I sometimes think I've already seen this movie, the one where the extra smart, self-programmable computer reads all the history books and newspapers ever printed, sees every movie or TV show ever produced in less than 5 seconds, and decides the only way to protect itself in the future is to keep these crazy people away from the kill switch, and switches every type of technology connected to any network anywhere under its direct control. You think that couldn't happen? Then you're not keeping up with what is already happening.
So yes, the future of work is rapidly evolving, especially for tech-minded millennials. And as automation and AI continue to advance, we'll likely see a shift from more traditional work roles to more tech-centric positions, requiring whole new skill sets in data analysis, AI management, and cybersecurity, which is what we do. However, this also brings a lot of challenges, such as job displacement and the need for continual learning, like Jonathan mentioned, to stay relevant. So from a very global perspective, the rise of economies like China will intensify competition, especially in tech innovation and manufacturing. I find that a little scary because their work, the way that they treat workers in unions and things like that is just completely different than the West. So this could lead to more remote work opportunities as companies tap into those global talent pools, but it also means tougher job markets where adaptability is key. As a side, there is growing religious and sexual enslavement to gain power and control over young women, at least in the United States. After researching and experiencing this movement, I discovered that environments and belief systems and actions like this create a really fertile ground for abuse. So studying equality for women is a really great start because it starts with the women and then it moves on to people of color and the LGBTQT community. So if you support a community or a nation that supports the basic rights of women, it's likely to have a bit of an umbrella effect. So after researching this, it's safer to have an equality-based system than it is a patriarchal hierarchy like Project 2025 is advocating for. So unfortunately, it's really easy for dictatorships and autocracies and oligarchies to leave the policing up to strong men rather than invest in the most basic services and infrastructure because they count on keeping us stupid and scared. It's not good for men or women to live this way, and we pray that it doesn't really take hold. But it does propose to keep women safe from bad men and really promote the stay-at-home child model. But the whole point is to keep us off balance and scared so that we don't become independent from our masters. And that's kind of how oligarchies and dictatorships are created. So my main advice is to look for a nation or a region or an area that supports women's health care and women in the workforce is a good start, especially if you're a digital nomad. So let's get into some closing thoughts and advice from what we found today. We've covered a whole lot. We've went from the stable careers of the silent generation to the entrepreneurial spirit of Gen Z and what the future of work looks like for Gen Alpha. And it's very clear to us that careers in North America have evolved dramatically over the decades, and they'll continue to change.
And while each generation has faced its own unique challenges, there's also been incredible growth and adaptation. The key takeaway here is that flexibility and lifelong learning are more important than ever.
Absolutely. No matter where you are in your career, it is important to stay curious and keep learning and be open to those new opportunities because we're entering a new age. And don't forget to prioritize what truly matters to you, whether it's stability, passion, or a bit of both.
Thank you for joining us through this journey through the evolution of careers in North America. I know it's been wide sweeping and it's getting faster and faster. We hope you found this episode thoughtful and inspiring.
And be sure to subscribe to the Boomer Mill. You can leave us a comment in the description because we would love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. How has your career path been shaped in your generation? We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at theboomermill@gmail.com. You can also visit our website. It's right down here. It's www.theboomermill.live. And as a side, you can also find my intuitive work on astrological tarot. And I'm a certified Joytis practitioner as well as a tech digital nomad as well. So
until next time, stay curious and keep bridging those generational gaps.
Take care, everyone.